When I was first asked to talk about aligning the creative process with the design process, business practices process, project management process, I spoke to a number of senior designers that I know. As Mark alluded to, I'm the president of Graphic Designers of Canada, BC chapter, we're the largest chapter in the country, which surprisingly, I'm like, how did we get that title? How did we get that number? So that's great. I think we're trying to align forces there. We'll push you guys to be the largest in the world for the DPM. I think that sounds good. I like that. I love talking about this subject in respect to the creative process and design process, something which is near and dear to my heart. It's quite misunderstood by the majority of people that have had to work through it or deal with it, or deal with us artsy-fartsy types. Because we can be a little bit off kilter, off color, off the charts at times. And so I'm just going to do a quick little survey. How many of you have actually worked with design teams or designers? Okay. How many of you have got a horror story? Oh yeah, absolutely. You know, and mea culpa, right? I mean, we work with a lot of designers ourselves with the firm I'm in right now, and we always run into some kind of issues along the way. So what I want to do is just explain the creative process in a general form in the time that we do have, and then of course I'm open to any questions and answers after, or questions afterwards. I will provide answers. The gist that I want to get into is that there is no question I will not answer. I promise to be as truthful, honest, as open, and as transparent as I possibly can. Probably off camera. But I will share anything that you would like to know in respect to answering, because those are critical in any successful project, right? Communication, transparency, openness, dialogue, knowing who to talk to and how to talk to them. Are they left thinkers, right thinkers? We're going to talk about that as well. And what I loved, doing a little bit of research before this talk, was the amount of parables and similarities between the project management persona and a designer. Problem solvers, troubleshooters, wanting to make a difference, and are constantly behind a deadline. Constantly, or almost never on time, are we? No, we don't admit to that in any way. There's always that little feeling of goosebumps, like, what's the date? Oh my God! Okay, so, what are some of the things we run into problems with? So I'm here to talk a little bit about the red flags and what to look for, especially within the design and creative process, and hopefully explain a little bit more of that. And it is scalable. We'll be looking at some smaller project bases, but it is scalable to any size project in respect to process. But what are some of the things we run into in problematic elements of working with designers or just working with project in general? What are those two key ones we usually stumble into? Problem with time?
Timing. Kind of hit on the creative idea on time.
Mm-hmm. And I love that. There's a little part that you'll see later. It's called ideation, which is a great word for, we'll get it done when it's ready, man. You know, I'm thinking, absolutely, cooking, percolating, that little light bulb's not quite full wattage. Time and money, budget restraints. You get to a certain point in the project and suddenly, hey, that's awesome, we're going to take it just as it is, but it's not, it's affordable. That's why we're going to stop at the project right at that time. So time and money. But what we run into the problem with is that the other thing is the lack of understanding of the creative process. So if you know what you're in store for, if you know who you're talking to, we can actually have a little better time understanding the nuances of the individual, the nuances of a team, because a team will adopt the nuances and character traits of a creative director. I've seen it time and time again. When you have a creative director or an AD in play, and they're the ones that are directing the show for their team will just follow along a little line. That's exactly the way it should be. And remembering that it's usually because of a mentoring role. Very angry designer right now. That positioning of senior, junior, CD, AD, all those positions within that creative process or the creative team, they're there to teach each other along the way. You know, we're learning every day, and I really hope you always have that as well. At the end of every day, ask yourself before you shut off the light or the computer or wherever you're doing, and say, what did I learn today? You know, there's so many things we need to take away. That's a little bit of an aside, but it's your homework. Okay. So, how many account reps do we have here? Any at all, or those that do duality between project management and account repping? Okay. Freelance project managers for the most part, independent and freelance. Any agency? A few. All right. Awesome. It's gonna poke in the ribs, open up some wounds, and it's like, oh man. We always think that it's going to be easier in the other side. The grass is always greener in agency. The grass is always greener in freelance and independent. And it's all parched. It's just on fire all the time. We raise it down. Okay, so we all enjoy the creative and exploratory aspects of any project. Am I right? I mean, there's a reason why you're doing what you do. It's not because you want to be the marshal, the warden, and just be cracking the whip all the time. Maybe some of you have a little bit of a kink towards that, that's fine. But in respect to what it is that you want to establish, that is a successful outcome. And with working with great people, and working with creatives is actually a lot of fun when all is said and done. And creatives love working with project managers because it reminds them what they should be doing on a regular basis, on a regular schedule. You know, I assure you, no matter what they say to you in person, inside they're thinking, these people are awesome. Okay. So let's talk about those uplands. I figure most people are here because you don't like hockey, and you have those particular times where, as I get full whitecaps were yelling here, so yeah, hockey again. So I want to talk about you ever finding yourself in that abyss between the joy of the creative process and the roar of business management practices, or project restrictions and tiny budgets, or lack of communication, which always occasionally leads us to hell. So we walk in with the best of intentions, hello everyone, and suddenly there's just something on fire somewhere. How many of you actually start your projects with a problem? Right? Okay. So we'll be speaking to that at many levels, or we should be, and using that, and this is an aside, I'll do a little bit of like, insider secret number 604-B, is when you have that, get a testimonial about it from someone. Because guaranteed you've been brought on board at a time where they need you because it's a problem. It's like, okay, here's something on fire, we've never heard of water. You know, could you please help us with that? And say, well, as a matter of fact, I know where I can source water. Okay, there's probably local water, local solo water, all kinds of freelance water people. So you walk in and say, well, what is it that's the problem? And so get a testimony at that time, because that's a weapon. That's a weapon to be hired sooner. That's a weapon to say any project you might be involved in next time around, you know, if you had had me on board 2 weeks earlier, you would have saved 4 weeks worth of work for your entire team. So use that to your advantage. And I'm saying that not because I want to, because those are my budgets we're talking about too, with regards to the farm, but because it's right and it works and it's something which happened. And when things have actually happened and you have testimonial to it, that's cachet. That's a valuable asset to be sharing. Okay? And it helps in the future. So, get into help, it's terrible. If a client doesn't pay, client wants more iterations, you miss an important part of the project, you disagree on a process or milestone with particular teams or team members, there's no sign-offs, and downstream workflow is waiting. None of this has ever happened before, right? Everything's always flawless all the time. So, when we get to the situation like, oh no, now what? All right, so what do we do? What do we do when this happens? Well, it's kind of late to retreat back to the design briefing or strategy notes now, isn't it? And this is assuming they even exist. So when we talk about creative process, when I go over this, we'll also be talking about the paperwork that follows suit, or should be involved in various sections of the creative process, so that we have paperwork to back it up. Because there's a great, not a great situation, it was a horrible situation where it came up, but it was a great solution. And where I had a team of designers, and they were stuck. They were just like, we can't do this, and I can't do this, and I'm not seeing this. And I stopped everybody, and I said, why are you having a problem with this? And they said, well, what do you mean? I said, your job is to execute something that is already known. And they said, well, what do you mean by that? I said, well, you're trying to give your opinion as to what it should be, and you're doing the same thing, and none of you are looking at the brief. So I don't care what you think. I don't care what you think. I care what the brief said. So what would the brief do right now? Was the line. So you can use that. What would the brief do? Never mind what everyone's opinion is. What would the brief do? And how often are people actually going back to that document? That singular piece of paper, or sure, probably multiple pages, which actually got you all that job. Okay, so that's a major source of information. So making sure that you did prepare one, or that someone has, which of course you did. Because how can you possibly get a project up first asking 1,000,001 questions, preparing a strategy, and this goes for all stakeholders in any project. Every single person involved in it should have some form of overview of what their situation would be going into it. What it is that they're bringing to a particular project, right? I mean, everyone has a job description. We'll talk about that as well. So you've had a project go sideways on you, everyone? Yeah. Would this profession exist if all projects were question. Okay, so actually, I'm going to go a little bit sideways on that one too. We're all here because other people screwed stuff up, right? Okay, that's actually, I find that very valuable right now. You guys are like a rescue team. It's like 911 for projects. I appreciate that. So what happens when the floor drops beneath our feet? So what I'm going to do is walk through navigating the design process and really looking at how we can better understand what makes up the design process and how to recognize the sign-up points and milestones. Some of this is going to be very, very rudimentary for you. Some of you are going to be seeing it for the first time, and all of you should be reminded that these are things that must be happening at certain points along the way in our process. And this projector will be turned off in exactly 32.
I pressed any other button. Any.
Okay. SS Multiply. So, before we address which one of these entities you might be, we must first address how we think and how we communicate. So, I asked all of our team members for a task and job analysis and a task and job description as to what they're bringing to the mix. I want to know what their role is in the project, and this includes project managers and account reps. So, to clearly define communication channels and accountability so we can maintain sign-offs and milestones. You want to know who's responsible for what when you begin, so you can call them out for not signing off or being on time later, and do so with a smile and diplomacy. And not call people up and say, you insert expletive here, you are expletive late, again, expletive, because it's usually what's happening at that time. So, at least that's what I hear a lot from my team, because I'm preaching, I'm not practicing what I'm saying. So like any client survey or design brief, we need to ask some tough questions to better understand how it is we can help each other. So we're going to start this process by asking 4 simple questions. And I want you to take these 4 questions to every team member that you have to work with and find a way to bring them through, because they can be rather terse and aggressive in the beginning, but they're very necessary for understanding where people sit within that hierarchy or the evolution of the project at large. So when we bring up these questions, they're actually quite easy to say. It's just, who are you? What do you do? What can you do? And what will you do? 4 very simple questions, and they are impossible to answer at times. However, they're easier to answer when they're specific to a project. When you ask people to focus away from themselves and consider who they are within the scope of particular parameters, you get better response and better answers. You also have people stepping up and saying, I am responsible for this, because there's a pride factor. And there's also an opportunity for them to say, and I'm going to get through this so I can elevate my position, my salary, the awareness, or get another job, whatever that might be. People want to be challenged. But get people to answer these questions, but do not get them to answer it until you've asked them yourself. It's like mentoring. Do not ask for a mentor until you're mentoring somebody yourself. Okay? Then you better appreciate that situation and what you're asking of someone. Okay? So if someone says, well, how am I supposed to do this? Oh, well, let me show you what I wrote. Have your little explanation. It's an elevator pitch. It's an overview. It's a simple job description as to what it is you're going to do on that job. So when we better understand our goals, our roles, our needs, our strengths, most importantly, what this does, it brings up weaknesses. Because if someone is in a particular position and they've just written their job description for you on where they're going to sit on that project, and there's one major thing missing that you think or everyone thinks that they're actually taking care of, and there's that void. Well, where are things going to slip through? The cracks, the voids. So you make that person either aware of that, or the team aware of it, or you say, hey, have you thought about it? They go, oh yeah, I try not to do that anymore. Well, already, before you can start the project, that's going to be where something's going to go wrong. So have people sign off. This is contractual, and I know it's difficult for lots of people, but I get people to sign contracts all the time. And that's what this is. When you ask somebody, what is it you're going to bring to this particular project? What can I count on you for? Then they're making a promise to you. Awesome. Ask for it in writing. Acknowledge that in an email. Love it, got it, here's mine. We agree that this is what we are each going to do within the parameters of the scope of this project. There's nothing more valuable than that when you need it later, because a red flag was missed, an amber flag was ignored, and suddenly you're in strife. I was told to try to introduce that word today. Poor grammar, but at least it was launched. Okay, so now we can move forward into the project. So creative process versus project management. There's a number of things that happen along the way. Creatives are all over the map. We start to get all artsy and start to design and do things. Then we usually end up meeting project management at around where everything's happening all at the same time. So in respect to creativity, researching, brainstorming, ideation, concept development, iterations, development, usability testing, production, we rarely apply a business workflow in that process. We need you to keep us in check along the way. Every one of them has got a particular milestone or a variable which must be met, and a deliverable that usually needs to be recognized at some point. We need to keep each other on track so that that designer isn't doing 4 hours of Pinterest research going, ooh, that's pretty, because that happens. Right now I'm looking at all these fantastic, colorful lanterns around. I'm missing the audience, I forgot what I'm talking about. It's easy to be distracted, and because it's a beautiful world, especially in a creative environment. We're coming up with all kinds of great stuff. How many things have hit the floor and stay there, like that one lantern over there is good. I was just joking myself earlier, of all the kettlebell weights in here, that'd be the only one I'd be working out with. But if we think about how many great ideas, fun moments, encouraging moments, educational pieces hit the ground and just stay there, they're gone, they're never actually collected later. And so the projects that I see have the most success are the ones that are actually remembering those and filing them away. Kind of like that leftovers or behind the scenes or what if, or could you imagine if we actually saw that idea through? We worked with one particular agency and we did that. I was brought in as a creative director and I started keeping everything off the set that wasn't quite working. And then I just did a couple of YouTube videos like a reporter and I said, oh, can you imagine if we did this all the way through and just kind of picture what that would look like? And then just sketch up the end. It was hilarious. It was a lot of fun because there were some really bad ideas. But you don't know they're bad until you see the end product of the right one that worked. Make sense? All right, totally off topic. I got mine. Here we go. So, not applying the business workflow in the very beginning can be dangerous, but I think it's important to recognize that this is not a linear path. When you initiate a creative process, it is extremely expansive, and we want our creatives to be exploring as much as possible. We want them to diverge, to vest, to lighten the load, to even weaken some of the concept and strengthen them again. Because it really is football shape. Where you're going through, you're learning, you're out, you're swimming. Your job is to constrain them within it so it does maintain at least a reasonable football shape to it. And not suddenly, Death Star explosions in Star Wars where they're so far gone we can't bring them back. And so it's that whole idea that you do want to explore, and then at a certain point we need to apply the filters. What is actually going to work? And where do most of those filters exist? In the brief, in the very beginning. Go explore, go ID, and then go back and say, is this what the client asked for? Is this going to work for their target audience? Is this within budget? Do we have the time to be looking at this? Have any of you actually brought up or seen ideas come up that you actually recommended not showing the client? Yeah. Why?
Often budget. So they'll come to you with something that you need to do like a helicopter shoot for it.
And suddenly it's a drone, which means some 12-year-old with a remote control helicopter kit, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, and with a GoPro as opposed to a red and a full helicopter rig.
Right.
I encourage you to consider that as a way of saying, if the next time around, this is what we do. We could actually take this further for you, should you choose. So there's a different way to introduce that idea. But I also want to add to that the ideas that you know are going to take way too long. Never mind budget. What about time? How many times have you said, you know what, we could introduce this to them, but if we showed that, they're going to need another 2 weeks to go through their board of directors and shareholders and stakeholders and come back with a response rate. And we know that that's going to put everything off the rails. That happens more often than people talk about. And so the cleaner you can be with your response to that particular situation, the more efficient the entire project can be at times. And so that's and I'm sure some of you are nodding your head like, oh yeah, I've been there, done that. And that's great. But it's also one of those kind of untold things. It's like, well, the client can't hear about that. There's many things the client can't hear about. There's many things the client shouldn't hear about. There's also many things the client never told us. That suddenly the project has gone askew because they didn't tell us in the beginning. So we have to be very demanding in the beginning with our questions, don't we? And we expect honesty, truthfulness, transparency. And yet here we are holding stuff back. But it's for the right reasons. I think that's another thing to be considering. It's something that we do for a living. To maintain that. So the design process is not linear. You need to be aware of that. Let me talk about the gray area for some people that are in there. We're talking about logical, analytical, and objective. A lot of creatives don't respond very well to this situation. This is where we need to be refining our process. This is where we need to be, doing our taxes, stuff like that. Like, why would we want to do that? We need people to help us with that. Now, project managers aren't just write things. You are a very creative lot. And like I said, there are so many parables and wonderful commonalities between the design thinker and the project manager. And I love seeing them come to life because there is creativity involved. So what I'm doing here is I'm showing you that you need to ask yourself, what qualities and characteristics do you bring into the mix? Because there has to be a balance. If you're walking in with a creative problem-solving and troubleshooting aspect and technique that you can speak to the creative team with, what are they going to bring from an analytical perspective to be reminding themselves that they are on track? Because there is a balance to everything when it's all said and done. So I go back to those 4 questions and making sure that you know that every team member has allocated their role, responsibilities, their descriptions and accountabilities of what they're going to be doing. Because then you can start to see what you need to either heighten your game with or to introduce somebody else to help that fit. Because you want to fill every hole along the way. Because if you don't have that balance, you end up with that little bit of hell that we talked about in the very beginning. A little bit of where you're just colliding. I usually call this agreement a collusion for collision. We want to collide. We want impact. We want a response of some kind. We don't know what that is. Sometimes it's like, whoa, sometimes it's like, yeah. But there's a response. There's an emotional element to every creative project. Without it, it's kind of sad. When you're involved in creativity and creative projects where there is no emotional response of some kind. So we need the team to bring that together to address that. So when we're talking about appreciating that and understanding those roles, we must understand that our roles are in educating, informing, and most importantly, including each other in that process. So making sure that you are admitting fully what it is you can do and what you can do, and vice versa. And what I find is that when we are looking at the projects we're on, we need to be looking at this whole idea of context, experience, and appreciation. And this is for forward-thinking of projects down the road. So we have experiences all the time. Some are good, some are bad, but I find that sometimes we're in a hurry. You don't take the time to actually denote what it was that, in context, was it good or bad? Because how many times have you been in a situation where there's agency or independent, where you walk into a scenario and you go, oh my God, they're doing it again. We just talked about that. The memory is this long. That's it. But when you can record that, report that, and remind people that the agency people are snickering a little bit more than most, because it's true. And I absolutely get it. That's why we're talking about it. Is that we don't. I don't even know why we keep going at it. There's just so many reasons. But if we take the time to actually denote the backing up experience, put it into context, discuss whether there's a lack or a bonus of appreciation. Did we appreciate what happened? Awesome. Let's remind ourselves of that. Let's include it as a practice. Let's do it again. What was the experience like? It was horrible. Great. Let's not do that again. Let's first ask, why did it go wrong? What happened? What is it that we missed? What could we do different? And then consider that part of your business acumen. Consider that part of your mission statement at that point. Bring it up. Just say, I'm just going to advise you as a company that, because this part here went totally askew, so I'm changing your mission statement to, we are a ABC company that does 1, 2, 3 widgets, and we promise never to do this again. Send it out as a comedic memo, and just remind them, because it'll happen again. We don't want that to happen. We want to avoid that. So, getting into the process a little bit more. I'm going to be presenting one way of looking at this process, and you're going to find your own workflow and solutions that fit your systems based partly on this talk, personal experiences, contextual applications as we discussed, and levels of appreciation for what has transpired. Also, I encourage, I'm not sure what the mechanism is currently for communications between members, but to live vicariously through others, both positive and negative, is a huge thing. So I'm looking forward to the social conversations to see what happens, to see if any of this triggers things. Oh gosh, absolutely. Because if people are going like this, you guys should be talking to each other. So you can find, well, what did you do? Because we need to help each other in all aspects of this. Find allies, make connections. I spoke to this earlier. Find out who it is that sits on one side of the fence versus the other, and making sure you have them on your side. Because some people you need to be more creative, some people you need to be more regimented. You need to make sure that you're actually calling them out on their skill sets. And once again, reminding yourself who has those weaknesses and avoiding them at all costs for those particular areas. They don't need to be included sometimes. You'll set up meetings, and it'll be the same list of people that need to be in the meeting. And I look at those people and I go, well, that person is just going to distract them, let's not include them. And they go, well, that's not fair, because they're involved in the meetings all the time, and they're actually on the email thread. So, tell them we don't need them, and here's why. I don't have a problem with that. You don't have to be mean about it. You're just going to say, hey, thank you very much, but at this particular time, we're going to focus over here. We think your time would be better suited on this. You call people out, the next thing they're going to be more involved in the next time. they're not going to do that thing again, which is to get them invited to the next meeting. But sometimes they just don't need to be there. How many times have we done that? Meeting 10 people, it only needed 4. It took 2 hours, it was a 10-minute conversation. By the time you're finished introductions, 20 minutes have gone by. Can we get an update? Couldn't you have emailed that to me? You know, let's talk about the problems in the summaries, not discuss the summaries. But managing meetings is a whole other session, isn't it? Know who you're working with, because one thing that I've seen, especially within agency environments, is that I've seen incredibly talented, creative people fail miserably because they have horrible business acumen. And vicariously, I've seen absolutely wonderful business people suddenly signing off on creative projects. Just for the sake of time and budget, because, well, this is what we did last time, it'll work again. The client seems to be reasonably happy, let's go. We can rationalize it, let's do it. You know, this happens, and it really does. There's no need for that to recognize what the skill sets are in the beginning. And also the balance. Balance. It can't lean one side or the other. So let's take a look at the 2 practices along the way. So when we talk about problems require solutions, and that is what we do. We are all strategists in this room, and we're developing solutions for our clients. We're educating and providing them a means to an end. So to grow intellectually, well, that's just a hell of a bonus for everybody involved, because we should be learning from every project we're on. Every experience should be a learning opportunity. So when we talk about the creative process, initially we hear this little thing in the very beginning, we hear about this thing called a problem. You know, I prefer terms like an opportunity, a situation, a project, you can call it what you will, but it's typically a problem. There's somebody who has something and they're trying to sell it to these people over there, and we're having an issue with the visual communication or the dialogue or the copy involved in that. How do we best achieve that? Well, we asked that problem. We're asking 1,000,001 questions of the client. So remember those 4 questions we came up before? Those should be part of every brief back to a client. It's simple background questions. Who are you? What do you do? What can you do? And what will you do? Because if you don't have those answers, how can you possibly help them succeed? Where can you take them from there? If they don't, and more importantly, that's also an editing process. If they're not sure where they're at, if they're unclear, if they're just hiring you because they did the same thing in the second quarter or the year before and it's on budget, they have no vision as to where they need to go with that. They're kind of looking at, okay, what do we do now? Well, what are the issues? How do we address this? Or be prepared to respond to that question already. So we want to make sure that we have an opportunity for them to explain and give all these answers back. We also want to make sure it doesn't sound like an interview or an interrogation along the way. So we discussed the questions. So in the brief, we need to be finding out about a background, aims and objectives, competition, target audience, perception, content, who's providing it, who's writing it, and then of course budget and timeline. I actually started a little test or an experiment where I was talking about budget and timeline within the first 5 questions. It's like, okay, well, what do you want to do? Have you done this before? No? How much money you got? Simple. I didn't word it that way, of course. That's just kind of silly. But what are we working with? Okay, and when would you like that? And then always respond with a snicker. Just like that. Perfect. Use that every single time. How much time do we have? Oh, that's good. Okay, that's good. After this, we talk about research and development within that creative process. So once we've got a history, an intent, a particular audience we wish to appeal to, and then we start to examine what else is out there. So we've heard about their competition, but we never really get enough of that, do we? We need to find out exactly what's going on. How many of you do audits for competitive analysis and research as well? Yeah, absolutely. And because in there lies further answers to the brief questions that the client may not be answering originally. Because they just don't know. They're so myopic in their thinking on their projects, they honestly believe they're the only people doing it at times. Is that familiar? Oh no, this is an original idea. That doesn't exist. That's a unicorn with a rainbow. It just doesn't exist. Has anybody ever actually seen the meme of the kitten that's in rainbow colors with a unicorn head and butterfly wings? It's the best thing to send anybody in bed with. Just saying. You might want to consider part of your defensive line as project management. So with research and development, we look at conceptualization, ideation, design development, which of course continues further with implementation, production, and further finishing the process involved. So 4 really oversimplified categories towards a creative process. But every single one of these has got a series of documents or opportunities for sign-up. I do not continue a project until we have a awareness from the client in each one of these positions. So, and also to try to maintain communication lines with the client to the point where it's so transparent that they're involved with every aspect of it along the way, to the point where they say to a certain point, they'll go, you know, we've had enough, we're good, we now trust you. Why don't you just continue on with that? So you know you can back up a little bit, but you still want to make sure you've got sign-up points at these key milestones. So consider that. How do you get into research and development so you clearly define what that briefing strategy is? Want me to yell at them? Yeah. I think somebody just got engaged. All right, they can come up here. So looking at these particular positions and knowing you should have signed off an agreement from all parties involved at every single point. Because you do not want to get here because that whole madman thing does not exist. There's no big reveal at the end. Here's your Kellogg's ad. That just, let's get drunk. You know, the let's get drunk part does exist, but that Kellogg's ad reveal does not. You want options, and you want agreement, you want transparency, you want to make sure that they are fully involved to the point where they're just tired of being involved and they trust you. And so this is something we want to be looking at. So if we break down just that first part, just that problem, the design brief, that strategy, and we talk about that, you'll hear the term creative brief, design brief, roadmap, design strategy document. Ultimately, it's a concise, solid project summary. And you should be having a document which shows exactly what the client said. Does that make sense? A brief should never have an answer from you in it. You should be asking the questions in a way that you're getting the client's voice and mindset and tone within that brief, within that project summary. Because when you read back the project summary, which was the first part of the proposal, which we'll get into in a second, when you give that back to the client should be reading going, this is exactly what we're looking for. Yeah, well, that's what you said. We've translated it into a way where we've actually put it into a document which can actually be broken down and then put into a project. So we can actually piece it through, right? So at any point when you're going through the design brief and there's a question that wasn't answered, if you find yourself inventing the answer, stop right there. Back up and contact somebody. Or ask if it's really important. Generally, a question is in your briefing document because it is important to be answered, so consider that. In the problem, we've got it, so that brief is what we're talking about. We're talking about the design brief, the roadmap, the design strategy document, like I said. Let's make sure that that is fully understood and appreciated. After that, a media analysis. In our design briefs, we do not ask them what they want. We ask them what they would like to have happen, how do they want their client to feel, what is the response they're looking for. The media is not important yet. I've had clients say, we need a website. And I'm just going to do a quick example. This is a true story. Client says, we need a website. Okay, great. Why? Because everyone's got one. Okay. What are you trying to do? I need to sell pizzas. To who? Well, the neighborhood. You know, we're a neighborhood pizza joint. Why can't we just get them to know where to go and what we're having as a feature? You need a website for that? No, you need a stack of classic trifold, one-color Xerox pamphlets and some guy in a little wacky wavy arm thing and a sign walking around and getting involved with community events. He goes, well, I never thought about that. I said, because they're just locked in their thing. They're myopic. They're the only one making pizza. Where else would they go? And seriously, and suddenly, no, that wasn't what we did. We did community engagement techniques and tactics, but it was way more successful than a website would have been. But they ended up actually getting a website afterwards as well. So growing the project. And say, wow, that's amazing. Now people are asking what's coming up next. And so, well, what do you have available to them? I don't know. Maybe we should have a web page. Now we can. Now we can talk about it. So growing with the client. So the media, and also, this is a terrible term, I despise it. It's right up the information superhighway, but when you hear the term new media, but when we're talking about media analysis, if we are going to innovate media, if we're going to transcend typical or expected media, we need to be asking, what is it we're trying to solve? And that's actually where a lot of projects end up with something new. A new product, a new chunk of software, a new way of seeing. That is innovation. And innovation doesn't happen by starting with, okay, we need a app. We need a website. We need a annual report. You know, what does that annual report look like? In now, it would be electronic, analog, etc. So making sure the media analysis is reviewed. Once you have those things, then you can actually start putting together a proper estimate and being very honest with the estimate. Because if those elements aren't really discussed fully, you really don't know what this is going to cost. And this is not costing money only, this is costing money and time. Work back, always judging ahead. We have an estimate worksheet that we keep internal, and it actually says right across in red, faded back there, internal document only, because we're going through a lot of questions that we have to ask, including client optimism factor, client difficulty factor. What's our competition in this particular area? Do we want to take a cut because of that? Pricing strategies exist in so many guises, but it's going to be, you know what, we worked with this client before, and it was horrible. Do we need it? All right, let's charge accordingly. This is being recorded. My name is Mark. The estimate worksheet is where we discuss elements of meetings, concept time, execution, subcontractors, expenses, production, administration, which is, why do people forget administration costs? You ever seen that? Just management. People don't charge for email. Now, I wouldn't put down emailing 5 hours, but it's an administrative cost. I mean, how many hours in your day are actually billable hours versus what you actually work? Thought about that? You're probably billing out, I'm going to guess 5 to 6, but you're probably working 8 to 10, because there's just those day-to-days. I call it the commute. You got to get somewhere, and we rarely ever charge for our commute. The only people that charge for travel time are movers. Moving studios right now, that's why I know that. I said, really? You're going to charge me 20 minutes driving and gas? Don't you just roll that into the mover fee per hour? Well, I never thought about that. No, I'd probably get charged double. So the estimate worksheet's in it, and then terms and conditions. So how many of you handle the money side of things, the contracts? Yeah. Okay, good. So this is really important, because terms and conditions, when we talk about the contract is actually all 4 of these things, and that's what's known as the proposal when you're sending this out. Now, the proposal can be read in very many guises and naming conventions. But when we're looking at this, internally, you need sign-offs on these things along the way. You need to be talking to your team internally before you can present all 4 of these to the client as a proposal. Right? These are more sign-off points. These are red flags. So if your creatives aren't giving you a proper estimate on how long certain things are going to take in respect to ideation or outputting or usability testing or anything like that, how long does it take to make those icons? I need to know. Well, based upon last time, good, that's a place to start. I've never done it before, that's a problem. Because then it's just, you're shooting blanks at them. I'm not sure what's going to happen. We want experience. Terms and conditions are very important. We need to discuss signatures. Has anybody worked in an environment or a project where there weren't contracts signed and something went wrong? You know what I mean? Yeah. It always happens. But the commitment side of that, the accountability side of that is important. So I'm coming full circle. When I ask you to talk to your team members to write down what their agreement is with you and the rest of the team, that's a contract. And if they say, well, we do this all the time. You rent an apartment, you get a gym membership, we're signing contracts left, right, and center. What are we not reading? The print, everything in it, the EULA, the end user license agreement. Agree. I just erased my hard drive. Damn it! We just hit that button right away. We're good to go. So it's just part of our trade. But it is that one step that says, I'm taking this a little more seriously. And when you do that with individuals, you can call them on that later. But more importantly, you probably won't have to, because they're actually recognizing they do need to step up. They promise to. I can't emphasize that aspect enough. So this is completely scalable. This could be for that pizza shop, or this could be for Volkswagen. There is a completely scalable nature to this particular process and the paperwork that follows it. So, we talk about addendums and not stopping along the way. When we break down the creative process into those 4 sections we discussed earlier and look at those various components of paperwork and sign-off points. So we have the proposal, we've got that out, but it's useless without signatures, right? So signing off, being accountable, and policing that. And so the reason why I'm breaking this down, and I'm thinking rather simply considering the intelligent audience we have in the room here, but I'm amazed at how many intelligent people go ahead and they just continue on when they don't have sign up at a particular point that could be detrimental. I don't understand that, and we do it all the time. So as a reminder to break it down and say, you know what, we cannot move ahead until we get this. When you put people on the spot, well, if you don't sign this proof, the press can't run. The next time we can book that press is 2 weeks from now. Your annual reports will arrive 3 days after your AGM. Is that okay? Can I get that in writing? Suddenly, that person is signing left, right, and center. They're good to go. They've just signed the wrong spelling of their company name because they're in such a hurry to get it done, because now they need to talk to their stakeholders, right? Or explain to them. Keeping on top of that. So the signatures, and then of course the deposit before you begin. And for all you independents and freelancers, make sure you're getting a deposit before you begin the job, right? Because guaranteed, especially those lovely startups, they always start up with the best of intentions and no money. Awesome, but we can't work that way. What's your pricing strategy? If you guys could summarize your pricing strategy as independents or freelancers, what would that be? One line, one quick line. Value, okay. That should be a goal. What about a formula? Any thoughts on that? I thought this was an interactive conversation. I got one for you, and this is something that surprised the hell out of me when we first discovered it. Celsius to Fahrenheit. As an independent, as a freelancer, I just want you to think about Celsius to Fahrenheit. Now, the kids in the crowd are going, I don't get it. But some of us had to convert temperatures. So what is the formula from Celsius to Fahrenheit? Wow, you're way too smart for this. Double it and add 30? Sound familiar? Okay. Why do we ask for a 50% deposit? Because the simplest thing we can do is figure out when we're losing money, and yet we rarely do that too. So, total aside, but I'm going to throw this out anyways. This is something that you should be sharing with anybody that you're mentoring, and it might be a reminder for yourselves. You go through your monthly expenses, you total it up, you take that monthly expense, you break that down to the billable hours you have available to work, and then you figure out your hourly rate, your minimum hourly rate to survive in your current status or place. That's what you need to continue doing what you're doing today, every day for the rest of your life. And then, of course, GNP and GS and the gross domestic product will come into play as well. But I'm assuming nobody is in here to continue what they're doing today and they want to grow, both financially and professionally, right? So we need to have a bit of a margin and buffer to be able to do that. But the worst thing in the world is to take on a project and then at the end be told you can't be paid for it and suddenly have debt. If you get 50% up front, you know at the worst, all your bills are paid. So what are you going to get from that? A sense of security, a sense of independence, a sense of strength, knowing you don't have anything to worry about. Because one of the biggest stresses in our entire team is money. Always is. It drives deadlines, it drives product efficiency, it drives people to the ground. So if we know that our expenses are paid before we even begin a job, then the rest is a bonus. Now, it's a bonus to reinvest into your company, of course. And then the add 30 is what I consider to be the negotiable item. So if we take a price, double it and add 30, let's say the project price is $10,000, your expense. It's now $20,000 plus $3,000, $23,000. So you give that estimate to the client, this is going to be a $23,000 project for this particular website. Okay, great. So $23,000, off you go, and they say, hey, it's a little bit pricey, you think we can back up a little bit? No problem, why don't I knock $2,000 off the top? But we want you to remove this particular page request here, and this particular blog post you've asked us to write, why don't you just do that internally? Great, awesome, no problem. You get less work, you know you're within your profit margin, and you still got wiggle room on your plus side. That plus 30 can be 30,000, 30%, $30, or 30 pairs of snowboard boots, depends on your client, because people love contract. So there's always something. That's your negotiable item. That's the only time, I stress that, you can actually, in a negotiation, knowingly say what you're willing to give up. Because that plus 30 is already in your okay? That's the only time. After that, you never give a response right away. Okay, so that's speaking less to the agency environment, because there's so many more particulars in that. Like an agency hourly is a very different formula that's being driven across than a small boutique agency or an independent. So when we start getting into our research and development, the project doesn't begin until we've got all this done. So here we're doing all this work, and we got no signatures and no check to get going. We don't start working. We do not start research and development. Even with ongoing clients, they should be ready to, okay, let's go. Let's get going. It's professional. It's saying, I'm serious about this, and I'd really like to take you seriously in what you do. Remember, just like signing a contract, it's just asking for the advance. That's all it is. and signing up as well. So NDAs, what are we talking about? Who are we talking to about it? Right? Non-disclosure agreements. Okay? If you don't have those in play, make sure they are. It's another red flag. You're suddenly being sent information. You're going, okay, this is opening when and where. The people that building are in, do they even know that this is happening? You've got information which could be sensitive. Okay? And many times you do. So non-disclosure agreements. You make sure not only you and your team, but anybody your team is talking to have got that direct association to the non-disclosure agreement. Do any of you deal with third-party non-disclosure agreements? Okay, so making sure your service providers are sent through as well. Because you can sign up with the client, then you hire somebody else, but now you're liable. Okay, in a litigious situation, you want to be very, very cautious about that. So the NDAs are always considered, and then the ever popular, hey, can you add this little thing in there? You know, hey, since you're already working on the website, can you throw in a logo? It's just a sticker, right? How long could that possibly take you? So we get back into the education side of things. So a change order form. Making sure that you're actually documenting any changes to the scope of the project. We've heard the term scope creep, taking advantage of the situation, there's various terms to it. No problem. You would like something extra? No problem. Then what do? You go right back to the beginning, you brief it out, you ask all the right questions, of course you're already familiar with the project, and then you create a new proposal. It's a smaller one, but it says you're summarizing what the change is, you write down how it's going to affect budget, and how it's going to affect the deadlines or timelines or work back, and how it's going to affect anything else. You get, is this correct? Yes. Please approve this, noting the changes above. Approved, thank you very much. Continue, you're good to go. So when it comes to invoice time, it has an agreed to estimate on the amount. When it comes to deadline times, you've got everyone that little bit of a shift because you've got a document supporting that. Don't overpromise and underdeliver. The opposite is okay, you can do it very good. And then, of course, subcontractor agreements. So not just NDAs with subcontractors, but agreements in place so that you're not suddenly surprised by their timeline or their budget. You're dealing with a number of individuals that are in an industry that have a tendency to be taking on freelance aspect positions, jobs, suddenly they're hired full-time and, qualified, and suddenly you've lost your developer on your project. You know, then what do we do? What was the clause in this that says, no, I need to commit to this and see it through within a certain period of time? Or you've got a situation where you can say, well, then we want all of our money back, and it would be nice if you could recommend somebody as well. So making sure that your subcontractor agreements are in play. Once again, a sign-off point. Another thing to add to that, always ask for quotes and always give estimates. When someone is giving you a quote, they're obligating to that price. If someone is giving you an estimate, they've got that plus 10, 20% on either side, right? Okay. A printer gives you a quote, but in their terms, it says you might get 10% less, you might get 10% more. So if you need 50,000 annual reports, and they got that little margin that says, well, we might give you 10% less because of paper or ink usage or spill or jam up on the machine, it happens. Suddenly you've only got 48,000 books, but according to their contract, we're good. According to your stakeholders, you have 2,000 very angry people that have invested a lot of money in the company. So making sure that the fine print is there and agreements are in play and understood. I love this. We must remind ourselves constantly to attend to the business matters of our business as we are also creating. And we also need to be attending to the creative minds and police them accordingly and make sure they're well fed and well rested and well caffeinated all at the same time. It seems to be a wonderful circle to be working in. So we talk about the playing field of project management situation. Typically we would have this discover, plan, create, and then manage in a creative environment. And this is typically, I'm going to guess, based upon our earlier conversation, this is when you're brought in. Sometimes at the end of the project, you need to now get things in play to go through. So this is where I want you to be getting those testimonials from the team saying, wouldn't it have been nicer if we were here at the beginning and showed you all of this? Absolutely, but we can afford that. That's up to you to then explain and educate that it's actually the same price sometimes to actually be able to be at the beginning and just be there 1 hour a day versus 8 hours a day if I can add more time fixing things at the end or managing. Because in there, typically we would say that we hit management at the end of the creative environment. We now know we need to be managing the whole way through, understanding from the very, very beginning when we get to. Otherwise, we don't get paid at the end there because our people are missing out. They're not getting what they're looking for. And so now that final bit to every project, including your own contracts, are how do we actually invoice properly? You know, what is in there? What has changed? Are we on track? Are we on time? Typically, I find is that we'll meet a deadline, the project is out, it's accepted, everyone's happy, and then you go and tally up all the billables, and suddenly you're over budget. Well, where and when did that happen? Why weren't we tracking that along the way? And this is the big thing that I have to hit everybody with constantly all the time. Every single member in that agreement, in their job description, also agrees that they're going to track every single day as to what they're doing on what part of the project. Absolutely. None of this 8 hours working on Volkswagen. Well, what part? Because otherwise, how do you backtrack to see where you're actually at? If the culture of your business and the culture of your team and the culture of your agency or your design firm is making sure that people are accountable of little timers along the way, and it doesn't matter what it is. It could be digital, manual, just a classic little piece of paper on the desk is fine, sticky notes. I even told, well, I'm a very visual person, no problem. What's your favorite colors? I gave you 3 colors. I went and got sticky notes, those colors. I said, here's the morning, here's your breaks, and here's the afternoon. I just want to know what you're working on in the morning, what you're doing in the afternoon, and you can figure out when you need your breaks along the way. Just put it down in 30-minute gaps with sticky notes. It's just right across the top, like a dashboard, right across the top of his desk. All these sticky notes, know exactly where it was every day. And you just took a picture of it, and it was literally color-coded blocks, depending on the project color, where the rest was. And so at the end of the week or end of the day, it would say, yeah, okay, good. They're creatives. It's a visual solution, and it worked. It was effective. So in order to get paid, we need to be making sure we understand time and money. So time tracking, of course, is essential. Making sure you're keeping everybody tracking along the way, tracking time, and making sure every single member is. So to summarize, we now know that all aspects of any project must be assigned. And I encourage everyone very early in the process to ensure that all team members have an opportunity to be asked what they believe their role is and what they should be accountable to. Because it's sometimes a perception issue. Someone walks in with a title, and the title is nowhere near what it is that their tasks and jobs actually are. Everyone's worried about the title of the business card, where they sit on the credits of any particular project at the end of it. But really what matters is, what is your job description? What are you accountable to? What are you responsible for? What deliverables do you have to be accountable for so that you can actually earn that particular title or any other title they'd like to add to it? Assign the job descriptions with task analysis, deliverable expectations that I just mentioned, complete with timelines, workbacks, and deadlines for sign-offs. Make sure everyone knows exactly when they need to have something done by. And of course, they're never going to be hit. There's always going to be variables. But let it be someone else's fault. Okay? Don't let it be yours. This is the only way we're going to be on point, on time, and on budget, is to know what character traits each of us are bringing into the mix. So, I just want to say thank you. I'm going to say a quick thank you to Matthew Clark from Subplot, who actually designed this deck for another presentation, so I've been using it time and time again, so he's very kind. And also Ross Melford before mine, who designed the typeface, which is called Charlie. See? Quick thanks to all of you for being here. Really, really appreciate the opportunity to share anything that might have been beneficial to you in any way, and a very special thank you to Rachel and Mark for bringing me on board. I hope you were able to glean something from this, even if it was a reminder, or a little bit of kick in the pants, or a little bit of, oh, I didn't know that. Any of that is valuable, hopefully in less than a 30-minute span, just quick information. So at the end of the night, you can go home and say, what did I learn today? I hope I contribute a little bit of that answer. Thank you all for having me.